And we are now recording, so I'm going to get it started. My name is Helen Laban. I run the Vermont Fresh Network. Grace Meyer, who's our communications manager, is also online here. And this is our third winemakers workshop, our second webinar. And we are excited to be able to present a webinar on telling your winery story with FM Munoz from Vermont Creamery and Todd Traskos from VT Wine Media. And just before we get started, if folks check out their screens, you should be able to see options, and you may need to move your cursor to make the toolbar show up. But there's going to be options to mute, which please do if you're not speaking, to manage whether or not your video feed is showing up. And then there's also a chat screen on the bottom. So if you have questions you want to ask before we get to the Q&A session, just type them in there and I'll be moderator and pay attention to those. We did add 30 minutes at the end after our first webinar, because we discovered that the webinar actually works pretty well for having a conversation and a Q&A, which we had not previously expected. So we've added some extra time at the end to this one to allow more time for that if folks want to have a conversation. This information does all get posted at vermontfresh.net, and I will send out an email with the recording and the notes when it becomes available. And on our Wine Project page, you can also find notes and recordings from the previous workshops. And you'll find them from future workshops in 2018. This is all happening as part of a one-year grant with the Specialty Crop Block Grant from the Vermont Agency of Agriculture. And it's designed to help Vermont winemakers sell more to Vermont restaurants. And it's a first stage grant, so we're sort of trying lots of different things to see what's the most helpful, and hopefully we'll be able to continue some of it in the future. The Vermont Grape and Wine Council is an advisor to this grant, and the Vermont Fresh Network represents the farmer and chef connections, not just wine, but with all Vermont products. So my spiel being done, Todd and FM, I don't know which one of you was going to start, but I will turn it over to whoever that one is. And when you start to talk, you'll automatically be the enlarged video on the screen for everyone.
Right. Well, I think FM and I had a quick back and forth via email, and sorry. I had a quick back and forth via email and thought maybe that I would go first because I'm just going to do kind of an overview of things to think about. And then he has a lot more professional experience in the actual targeting and the platforms that are available. So, and hang on, I've got to turn that off. The physical therapist finally gets back to you. Okay, so I was thinking about it, and I also got in touch with a number of folks that I'm associated with that are media people or writers, either freelance or actually do columns for outlets, and the kind of people that wineries might want to be making contact with. And they confirmed a lot of my suspicions and stuff that I picked up over the years. So I thought that maybe there's a way to go about it. We can put together a little mnemonic device to help us organize ourselves. When most everybody that's involved with wine or winemaking knows about the 5 S's of wine, which are to first see the wine, see what it looks like, and then swirl the wine to aerate it, and sniff it to get a sense of what its aromatics are like, sip it to get it in your mouth, and then move it around, savor. And so that's a little guideline for how to go about tasting wine. It's kind of simplistic, but it does help people move through the path of wine tasting. So I thought, why not come up with 5 S's in terms of what you do with your story, because the story is actually only one of the 5 S's. And so what we came up with was stats, statistics, story, surveillance, synergy, and sustain. And we'll start with stats. A couple of friends and I did bat it around a bit in terms of whether the story is first or the stats should be first. And it seemed pretty uniform in their response that when they're looking into a winery or a winery gets in touch with them, they want to have the easiest access to that winery's basic information as possible. And that it's one of the biggest complaints was when they wind up with samples that are sent to them, that there's no tech sheet that for each of the wines that describes, the wine's name, its vintage, some of the technical specifications like its pH, how much alcohol's in it, how much residual sugar, how is it processed, what is that vineyard block like, maybe what even was the weather like. So uniformly, everyone said you need to have a technical sheet for every single wine that you make and update that sheet annually and keep a library so that if someone winds up with an older bottle, they can go to your website and look up the collection of technical sheets and find this one that's specific to you and that specific wine in that year. Now, it may seem like a lot of work, but I would suggest that what you do is come up with a standard template, a Word document that has the picture of the bottle here, the name here, the blocks of information. And as a matter of course, this is all information that you wind up with anyways in terms of the alcohol for this year or the residual sugar. But a lot of the rest of the information will remain the same. So it's not a big deal to just swap in the new stuff. So have your technical information available at all times, not just on the website, but in the tasting room, so that if somebody wants to know more, and they're either a geek or potentially a professional, whether it be a writer or a trade person, make sure that you have that kind of stuff available for them. The other parts that you want to have on there is distribution. Where are the wines available? Or at least you want to have that information readily available. What's front line pricing as well? Because these are all things that writers and tradespeople need in order to do their work. And it's better to push that to them and make it available than have them need to pull it from you, because that's the frustrating part, is that when they feel like they're coming up short with regards to information. Keep the website up to date. That was one of the other things, is that they found it frustrating if you go to a website and it looks like there hasn't been anything done to it in a couple of years, because they know that you're still making wine. It's important to keep that surface area relevant and current, because even though your tasting room's only open a few, hours a week compared to the number of hours that you're probably working in the winery, the website's working for you all the time. So stats, bottom line, make sure you have all that information available, because it's going to make it that much easier for people to spend the time that they do communicating with you, asking the questions that they want to ask, not the trying to pull together the basic information that they should have. So then story. The other thing I heard from everyone was just being genuine about who you are and being honest about what you're doing and not embellishing. That actually is a real detractor. It's tempting to, in the wine world, where story seems to mean a lot, and it does, to want to fluff it up a little bit. But it's kind of like going for a job interview. You don't want to be someone you're not, because otherwise that's the person you have to be down the road to keep expectations. So when you're putting content out there, because people are involved in digital platforms, the story part is really important, because your content should probably be 80% informational and 20% promotional. I mean, I watch people's Instagram feeds, and I can see the difference between the ones that are sharing stuff about what their process is and what they're doing versus those that every Instagram post looks like an advertisement. Even if it's not meant to be, it's posed. So the platforms are your way to share your day-to-day business, your the things that come up, the funny things that happen at the vineyard. Or hello? Oh, sorry.
I didn't know I'm on here.
Oh. The pictures that you take are worth 1,000 words, and they're often the quick hits that keep people's interest in what it is you're doing. And there are statistics that say something like it takes 7 to 13 strong impressions with folks before they'll convert from an interested follower into a consumer or a regular purchaser. So given that people are really inundated by a lot of information these days, it's really important to develop content on a regular basis, make it a habit, so that you're at least in the stream of people's consciousness, or have the potential to be. On the note of producing visual information, very short organic video is also a really valuable thing to think about. It's, you know, a 15-second to 30-second video can go a long way. I would just suggest that having a basic tripod or using a selfie stick like a boom work really well in terms of making sure that you have a reasonably stable image. It doesn't need to be, you know, completely locked down. You want to have real life movement, but you definitely don't want the jagged situation where it makes it too hard for people to watch. But think about using short video as a way to communicate. And it doesn't have to be someone standing in front of the camera talking and giving a spiel. It can just be stuff like wine running out of the press, or some short clips of what the flowering looks like in the vineyard today. The small things that give a glimpse into what it is that you're doing, because ultimately the wine is the product, but that product is coming from a whole lot of other work that you folks do. And it's understanding what you do that helps you develop customers who are repeat customers, not just single-time buyers. So, okay. So we've done stats and story and surveillance. We were tempted to call this part stalking, but maybe that's a little creepy. And if at any point, if somebody does want to jump in, don't feel like I have to do a marathon run through this stuff. I'm glad to clarify if necessary.
And I should also say, this is Helen, I auto mute people as they come on, but you have the power to unmute yourselves, I believe. And if not, yell at me in chat and I will unmute you. Yeah,
you can always use your little chat window and send something to Helen, and then she's a very good moderator. So surveillance. when it comes to connecting with the media, and frankly, anybody, we're living in an interesting time right now where we do have the ability to know something about the folks that we might want to be building relationships with or getting in front of. And so, especially with media people, writers, or bloggers, it really pays to look at what they're doing, look at what their writing is like, see who their audience is, the kind of circles that they move in, because they need to be a right fit for your situation. I mean, if someone's a wine blogger that only does organic, vegan, biodynamic wines, then it doesn't pay to spend time trying to get yourself in front of them. And this is what I heard quite a bit from the writers that I talked to, is that there were that unsolicited wine showing up, or kind of hard first pitches, were a really disincentive to them wanting to follow up more on people's stories. So we do advocate, and they said they don't mind being stalked in terms of people following their work and even participating to the level of commentary or other kind of communications about the work. So, and it might also not be wine folks direct. Oh, okay, there we go. I was muted for a moment. It might not be wine folks directly that you find yourself interested in. You may find that someone in your wine, in a wine person's circle of connections, is actually a very, powerful in the knitting blogs or something like that, and has quite a few followers, but that there's crossover there. And if you're interested in knitting too, well, it may be that the media connections that you're needing to make are more tangential than you think. So it's like building any kind of network. You don't necessarily wind up with the web that you think you needed, because you make those synchronous connections through people or around people. So keep your mind open as to who influencers are, because wine writers and wine media are only talking to a fraction of the wine drinking public. I would say that probably book clubs might have more power as a group than any single wine writer might, in terms of where people congregate around wine. And also, in some cases, a part-time wine blogger who is active in your region, that spending time developing a relationship with them might be ultimately more valuable than spending time or money trying to chase down that one big article in a paper through using an agent or a publicist. So spend time surveilling. Understand the landscape around you, and try to understand who the folks are that you want to.
Todd, you seem to have cut out again. I'm not sure why. I show nothing on my side. No, you're unmuted, but I'm wondering if your microphone on your side is cutting out.
How's that?
Oh, there you go.
Aha. Don't touch that.
I won't.
That was for me. Okay. So looking for synergies. When you are looking to try to get yourself in front of publications, realize that you're really looking to connect with people, not the outlets. And the writers are oftentimes under time duress and deadline and content boundaries that put a lot of pressure on them, and so it's even harder when they feel like they're being commoditized. It's one thing to have that happen in the business of doing the writing, but if the folks that are trying to get in front of you kind of treat you in a more than arm's length way, then it gets hard for them to want to get connected with people's stories. So this goes back to the surveillance part of really looking for people that you can connect with, and look for natural affinities, and which is where it may be that the people that you find that are social influencers are not necessarily wine writers themselves. You want to look for crossover opportunities. The relationships can't be just transactional. There also is something that when you're trying to get in front of people, especially when you're sending samples out, is to know that there are no quid pro quos. There are kind of like some ethical parameters for wine writers, especially given that wine is a very certain kind of product that the government takes a lot of interest in controlling. And so sorry. Yeah, so there can't be quid pro quo. Just because you've given somebody wine doesn't mean that they're necessarily, they can be expected to write about it. Or be asked, when will you write about this? That's a choice that a winery has to make in terms of whether or not they want to put samples out there in front of people. And there were several years ago, like the golden age of wine blogging, where wineries were sending a lot of wine around to people as soon as they heard that they had some kind of a platform where they were discussing those kind of products. And I think people overspent in that way. And then there was a pullback away from that kind of methodology. And now it's starting to happen again, but wineries are being a lot more selective about who they send things to, especially if people don't do reviews that often, then that's not a good place to send. I don't know how much demand folks in Vermont get for samples. Being a lesser known wine region, it's probably not a huge outcry for the wines, but that's something that over time we can create. And, with regional interest, folks in the Boston area and the New York area might be good targets for those kinds of opportunities. But definitely don't send them unsolicited. And if possible, strike up a conversation with the person beforehand. Let's see. When you want to get in front of writers, this is where you can use your natural synergies with other folks in your area. If you do events, consider doing events that are maybe fundraiser associated or with other organizations in your communities that give writers an opportunity to talk about your stuff in a larger context, so that it's not just all about you or just about this particular wine. By publicizing some folks have music events in the summertime. Maybe consider making a special invite to a couple of wine media people or tradespeople ahead of time, special invites to those events, and possibly even carve out a little bit of time, like a half an hour ahead, to talk to them individually if you can make time for something like that, and then let them go enjoy the event on their own. But those kinds of things that are, kind of seem routine to you are opportunities to get some exposure. It's something that if people are particularly invited, as opposed to coming to it on their own, it fosters that connection that you're more to them than just an outlet. You can also invite people in small groups to do special tastings. If you're getting ready to release a new wine and you're going to have the wine release party on a Saturday, maybe the Monday or Tuesday before, that's a good time to have a special invite for some tradespeople, maybe a writer or two, or some restaurateurs. Ask them to come in and say, hey, we want you to get a chance to try this before the public does. Okay, so let me keep moving here because I think I'm almost to the end of my time. Sustain. This goes back to what we talked about before in terms of the story and putting your content out there. It needs to be a sustained effort. It's something that needs to be done on a regular basis, whether it's only once a month or it's once a week, or you're putting out one picture a day. Make sure keep your consistency up and make it part of your regular business process. Sustain the relationships that you build with people that are writers or tradespeople. Because again, it's not just about getting in print media or on web media. It's about building a network of awareness, and the folks that you want to develop relationships with need to see those connections as actual relationships. So keep them in the loop when you're doing something special. Like I said, if you're having a special event coming up, or you're going to do a blast email about a release of a new wine or special guests at the winery, preamble it for them, or send those folks a message ahead of time saying, hey, we're about to do this special event. I wanted just to let you know that we'd be interested in inviting you, but wanted to let you know that before you got the blast email. Sorry, I'm referring to my notes here because I think in some ways I've kind of merged the sustain part with some of the others in terms of elaborating on the fact that consistency is important, whether it's in the information that you have on the website. Like I said, sustained effort to make sure that you have the new tech sheets ready every year. Within the story, a sustained effort to make sure that you're doing something on a regular basis that provides insight into what's going on behind the wine that you're selling. Keep surveilling your landscape, because there are always new people coming in to the arena around you or into your ecosystems, and try to sustain any relationships that you do build. And through those relationships, you may find other relationships. So I at some point would be happy to suggest some folks that are in the New England area that I think might be good people to make contact with, that are themselves fairly regular producers of content about regional products, but are also connected to people that at first sight may not be someone you would think you would chase down, but could turn out to be fairly useful. So this is something I think we're going to work on, this group of wine writers and tradespeople that I connect with in terms of hashing this idea out a little bit more: stats, story, surveillance, synergy, and sustaining. Because it may be something that would be of use to other folks. So you guys are getting the first rundown of this information, and it may be that it'll be made into a more formal product or presentation at some point. And when that comes, we will turn it back around and share it with everybody.
Great. Thank you. And also, for those who are, I know some folks have joined while you were speaking, so just for those folks who joined, and to that last point, don't forget that we do post notes and summaries and recordings of each of the webinars on the VermontFresh.net website afterwards within a couple of days. And you will see at the end of this, I'll share the screen that shows you where those are on our website. But again, VermontFresh.net. And Todd, if you don't mind, I will go straight to FM just to finish up the presentation portion, and then we'll switch over to the Q&A and discussion. But again, if you had questions that you don't want to lose while we shift gears a little bit, just throw them into that chat box. You can do either a message to everyone or a private message to me, and we'll be sure that those are in the queue for discussion. So with that being said, FM, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
I can.
Awesome. Okay. So my name is FM Munoz, and I am the Director of Marketing for Vermont Creamery. I have had the pleasure of working for Vermont Creamery for a little over 4 years now. And so Helen asked me to sort of share with you some of the tactics that I have come to know and value in my world of artisan cheese. And I think there's a lot of crossover here, and really excited to hear Todd share these sort of foundational elements for working with influencers, because they very much align with some of what I'd like to share with you today. I did put together some slides. I work in a larger business, so putting PowerPoints together is not necessarily something that you probably do in your daily life, but it's something that I do quite a bit of, so it's a place where I feel most comfortable. I took some notes, Todd, while you were talking, so I just put them in to one of the slides here, and Helen, I'll give you this deck to you so that you can share it out to the group as well after the presentation. So what I wanted to do quickly is sort of go through some of the foundational pieces. I spent some time looking through the websites of various producers in Vermont and looking at social media presence and product and packaging and things like that. And I wanted to share some of the elements that I sort of think are essentials for our Vermont winemakers. And then I thought I would highlight more broadly some of the tactics that I think hold exciting potential for the industry in Vermont today. They're examples that are fairly close into the work that I do. Some of them are examples of the work that Vermont Creamery has done, but also I've tried to tap into sort of the larger world of Vermont artisan food production, as well as Vermont sort of makers in general. So I'll share various examples. But I'm going to try to speed through it so that we can save some time at the end for conversation. I think that all of our producers are in very different places and have different opportunities in front of them. And so I want to make sure that we can sort of get into some of the questions that you have. But in general, the way that I as a marketer think about the work that I'm doing is I break it down. I think about the channels, and channels are really, like Todd was mentioning, are your platform. They're where you get to show up as a brand and business and tell your story. So, you know, the needs to have that I think are very critical for you all in your businesses are a modern, mobile-friendly website. Those can be achieved very inexpensively. There are out-of-the-box solutions where you just drop in your copy, the story, the words and some photos or videos, and you're good to go. You can, get a brand new template and hosting for, $150 a year. It's an incredibly important investment. I think that because many of you have tasting rooms, event experiences, at your vineyard or at your winery, it's really important that you are paying close attention to services like Yelp, Google Places, TripAdvisor, any of those aggregators that are the places where people, potential customers, are going to first encounter or go to look for your business. So you might go on Yelp while you're in Burlington, Vermont, and search, winery or wine tasting, and you want to make sure that your business is on that list, and that the information there, the details about your hours, the photography is a positive reflection of your business and stewards connection and draws people in. And then I think the final basic is a well-managed and regularly updated Facebook page. I'll talk about content in a minute. Nice to have. Instagram, highly visual platform. It's not hard to manage. Like Todd mentioned, it's a great place to share the daily life of your business. I can speak to our experience at Vermont Creamery. We can spend a lot of money and a lot of time crafting the most beautiful photograph with a food stylist and a blogger and share it and get half the engagement that we might get from simply walking into one of our aging rooms and taking a picture of a rack of cheese. So the things that you think of as routine, that you walk by every day and experience every day in your life as a winemaker, those are the snippets, the tidbits that your audiences are going to be so excited to see. It's sort of like a behind the scenes peek at the winemaking process. People are really interested in how the product comes to market. They're really interested in transparency today. So giving people that glimpse, giving people access to your daily life as winemakers is a very easy thing to do, and could take you 5 minutes a day to post every day to Instagram, but can pay out really significantly in terms of building brand awareness, loyalty, and connection to your business. I think video content is increasingly important. There's a lot of very talented videographers in Vermont who are willing, who work fairly inexpensively and produce very high quality content. But I think that in the same way that you invest in your, let's say your tasting room or your operation, your production, your equipment, you need to think about the ways in which you're also investing in your brand and the marketing tactics and tools that you have to tell the story of your product and your brand and your business. I think about print, radio, and television. Those are not tactics that I'm as familiar with. I think some of them have a lot of utility in a very regionalized or localized business model. So for Vermont winemakers, there actually may be a lot of effectiveness in pursuing print advertising that reaches a highly localized area, especially if you're seeking to draw people into a tasting room or advertising event, something like that. On the brand and content front, there's some overlap here with what Todd was speaking to. I agree with him that you need to be authentic in the way that you tell and talk about your story. Nobody wants unnecessary embellishment, but you also should not. I feel like you shouldn't shy away from spending some time thinking strategically about what that story is and crafting it in such a way that it is engaging and compelling to the people that you're trying to reach. So what I mean by that is that people have a very limited attention span today. They're bombarded with information, whether you're an influencer, a food writer, a wine writer, or just a consumer. And so you really need to think about what are the sort of foundational elements of your story that are unique or ownable, are exciting, and interesting to capture the attention and keep the attention of potential customers. And I'd encourage you to think about or challenge yourself and the people that you work closely with to think hard about the difference between what you think is valuable and important and compelling about your story and what a consumer really values and thinks about. I know I've learned this lesson many times. I'm so close to the cheese and the product, and I think that, you know, the science of cheese making or this technical thing that we're doing is amazing, and I want to tell that story. And at the end of the day, very few people actually care. And so you really need to strike a balance and make sure that you're always sort of assuming trying to assume as best you can the mindset of the consumer and the customer to understand what they're really valuing and looking for. I think thinking about how you tell your story, your brand, I call it your brand voice or tone, is also important. Are you, are you humorous? Are you wry? Are you serious? Right? Though I think the wine world, you have the opportunity to be a very sort of serious, traditional winemaker with a serious brand voice that's all about vintage and varietal and terroir. Or you might be really focused on, as a brand, on the social aspects of wine and the way that wine brings you together and builds connection and community, and tell that story in a more lighthearted way. Neither of those is right, but I do think you need to make a decision about how you're going to tell your story and how you're going to talk about it and the tone you're going to use. And the other thing that I would note is that, especially for small businesses where founders or owners are also the operators and often are often the ones who are managing social media and things like that, think a little bit about whether whether you're speaking in your voice or the voice of the brand and business. And I'd encourage you to think about whether it's appropriate for those to be the same or if they should be different. At Vermont Creamery, we speak as we, us, we're the business. We're speaking as Vermont Creamery. We're not speaking as Bob or Allison, our co-founders, or as, Adeline, our president. And when we are speaking in their voice, it's identified clearly as such. So we've identified a tone for the business and the brand, and then we bring in various voices to speak on particular issues. One thing, the wine industry has always been really fascinating to me as somebody who really is interested in design. And what I will say is that consumers really value it, and I think that it's important. There is a lot of opportunity from my perspective for the wine industry. There's a lot of white space there. So there's a lot of opportunity for businesses and products to stand out at shelf and stand out online and in social media simply by spending some time investing in well-designed packaging, well-designed logos and branding. It doesn't have to be expensive. There's a lot of really talented people out there who are just getting started and would love to share their expertise and their know-how with you. But I think that wine is really interesting to me because as a sort of a wine outsider, it feels really steeped in tradition and connected to sort of an old world mentality. And as a cheesemaker, I am familiar with that dynamic as well. But I think that, as Vermont winemakers, we potentially have the opportunity, growing wine in a non-traditional region, to break the mold a little bit. And we're given permission or have license to do that in many ways. And I'd encourage us to think also about the ways in which branding and packaging design can help us tell our story. Professional photography, it's a must. It doesn't have to be expensive. It can be, conducted efficiently in terms of cost. It needs to be, it's an investment, again, in the same way that you're investing in your the other pieces of your operation. Nice to have would be video content. So these are just some pictures I pulled from online. Lots of smiling faces here. People like to see other people having a good time and interacting with their product and with their business. So Vermont is a beautiful place. Winemaking is a beautiful practice. There's lots of opportunity to capture great engaging content and to tell your story. Speaking about, telling your story, it's really important to think about who you're talking to, and that every audience has a unique interest, and that your story is allowed to and should change depending on who you're telling it to. So it's not that you're lying, or it's that you're highlighting different pieces of what you're talking about depending on who you're talking to. So restaurants and food service will vary in their interest, but some may be very interested in the story and really don't care about the price. Others really care that the product turns off the shelf or that people are going to be ordering it. And so your story is going to be different there, right? You know this when you talk to buyers or distributors. And the same thing with consumers. Your millennial is going to be a very different consumer than your baby boomer. And there are a lot of implications for that in the way that you tell your story, and even beyond that. I'll share that in a minute. And the same thing, like Todd mentioned with media and influencers, there's your obligation, your opportunity as a business is to craft a pitch, craft a story that helps wine media or a food writer do their job better, right? You want to bring them a unique, compelling story that's going to help, that they're going to be able to tell about your business, that's going to make them look good, that's going to make their job easier. So again, it's always about customizing and crafting a pitch. If you want somebody to talk about you, think about it more as a relationship, as something that you need to build over time. Many of the relationships that we have with food writers and influencers are 5, 10, 15 years old, and we maybe didn't get anything out of it for 5 years, but we were persistent and we invested in that relationship over time, so that when they were thinking about a Vermont cheese for an article, or they needed a soft ripened cheese for a class they were teaching at Aspen Food and Wine, they thought of us because they know us, and they've seen that we've invested in them and supported them in their work. So to just really briefly speak about knowing your audience, I pulled this really quickly this morning, and I think we can all roll our eyes at the notion of millennials and the impacts that they're having on our business and our world. But I didn't make this information up. I pulled it from Fortune and Food and Beverage 101, but just wanted to share this as an example that generationally, our audiences have different interests. And so there's lots of information out there about the various wine drinking behaviors and attitudes by generation. So millennials, as a wine drinking generation, they're drinking more wine than any other generation, right? And in terms of their values and their interests, they care about sustainability. They're adventurous, so they are really into exploring new and different varieties and drink multiple varieties. And enotourism is a really sort of hot commodity for them. I think that's a huge opportunity for Vermont producers. But not only does knowing your audience help you think about how you're going to tell your story, or what piece of your story you're going to focus on. From a larger perspective, from both a business plan, a long-term business planning perspective, and also a product innovation perspective, it helps you think about what your priorities should be. And so, what I'm sharing, the two images I share are solar panels at a vineyard site, and then Shelburne Vineyards Capsize, which is it's a canned wine. And so, I think I think that knowing your audience really can help you not only craft the message and the way that you tell your story on your website or to wine writers or social media, but also it should be an important factor in driving the decisions that you make about investments you make in your operation, let's say sustainable energy or solar panels or biodynamic certification or whatever the case might be, but also is it's a critical driver of innovation. It's nice to make a product that you love and want to drink, but if there is not a market for that product, if that product doesn't reflect the need of your audience, that product is not going to succeed for you. So a list of all the different kinds of tactics that I thought are important here for our group and conversation. I'm going to talk about some of them more in depth. I've listed them sort of in what I think are, from sort of easiest to execute to potentially more complex or difficult. And then the think abouts at the end probably aren't actually that difficult to execute, but I wasn't sure how relevant they would be to all of us. So I wanted to share some examples from some things that are happening in Vermont. Ardelia Farm, it's a flower farm. They're in the Northeast Kingdom. They have 11,500 followers on Instagram. I think it's an incredible example of a very small Vermont producer. They sell flowers at the Burlington Farmers Market, who has found their audience niche online by posting pictures of the flowers that they grow. It's a small but highly engaged community of people who are following people like Ardelia Farm, Floret, which is out west. And you see an example below of Carrie Nershi. She's a food blogger and influencer based in Burlington, Vermont, who picked up these flowers at the farmer's market, tags Ardelia Farm. At this point had 3,200 likes on the image, is helping them tell their story simply and in a beautiful and engaging way, because Ardelia Farm has built a connection with her. She's local, she's here, she shops at the farmer's market, so it wasn't a hard connection to build, but you could imagine that if they every week provided her with a free bouquet of flowers when she came to the farmer's market, how much attention their business could garner and how much interest they could get from consumers, and how they could easily capitalize on that opportunity. I think when it comes to influencers, you have to choose them wisely because you're trusting them to tell the story of your product and your business. This is an example of a regional influencer. Her name is Jackie. She was here this fall as part of a collaboration with Vermont Tourism. And during her trip in Vermont, she visited all of these amazing Vermont places. So she was at the Equinox Resort. She visited Simon Pierce. During her adventures in Vermont, she was telling the story of the Vermont brand, but then also telling the story of these Vermont businesses. So the way that this would typically work is that you would identify an influencer, and then like Todd said, you would reach out to them and offer them an opportunity to come and visit you, invite them to a special VIP tasting, or to come and stay at the vineyard and learn how to make wine. Or there are so many things that you can offer that you might not think are of value to people, to influencers, that are actually of really significant value. The opportunity to meet entrepreneurs in Vermont who are making a living off the land, who are making great products. This is sort of content gold for these influencers, and it's an opportunity for them to potentially drive up from Boston or fly up from New York City and spend a beautiful weekend that you can craft for them. And then they have the opportunity to help you tell your story to their audience. This is an example of something that we do every year. It's called Cheese Camp. And this is a more elaborate example of engaging with influencers, but we bring a group of 8 to 12 food bloggers and photographers to Vermont every year. And they spend 4 days with us. And during that time, they learn to make cheese. They have dinner at Allison Hooper's house, our co-founder. They tour Ayresbrook Goat Dairy and meet the goats. And then we surround them with various partner brands that we think highlight different attributes of the Vermont Creamery brand and also the Vermont experience more broadly. So you can see this is just content that was generated during that trip, but we take them to Farmhouse Pottery, we spend some time at Citizen Cider, we go tour Shelburne Farms and let them see the estate there. So lots of opportunity there to bring really significant value to the work that these, in this case, young women are doing by arranging this media trip. And I'll say that the arrangement we have with them is that we pay to bring them in, and that we reimburse them for their travel, and we host them while they're here. But the brands that come in do so at their own cost. So it's a sort of in-kind donation to the experience. And at the end, these women leave feeling deeply connected to the brands that they've met while they're here, and well-equipped to tell the story in an ongoing way. Investing in these relationships, one thing I wanted to mention when Todd was speaking was that these relationships in this case are somewhat paid, right? Because we're reimbursing them for their travel, but we get so much more out of this investment because we see that they are more likely to share and tag Vermont Creamery on social media in an ongoing way without us asking after engaging with us in this way. So they're generating content more frequently and for free because they feel personally connected to our business and the products that we make. Another example of fostering a relationship with an influencer, Tia Keenan is we met Tia years and years and years ago, and she was a cheesemonger. She was working in a restaurant, and we have always invested in relationships with cheesemongers, and that investment has come to bear fruit in the sense that today Tia is an ongoing contributor to the Wall Street Journal, as well as Bon Appetit. So, this was last year. She did an A to Z guide to cheese, and Vermont Creamery's product ends up on the pages of the Wall Street Journal. I think we have, since this article, she has included us in, I think, 2 or 3 additional articles in the Wall Street Journal, and also in articles on the Bon Appetit website, as well as in print and their podcast. So these relationships that may seem small today, certainly over time can come to have a really significant impact on your business. And so I'd encourage you to not underestimate their value or the importance of taking time and making relationship building a part of your routine business practices. So this is just a recent quote about micro-influencers, these small bloggers that I'm talking about. What they bring is an authentic third-party endorsement to your brand and product, right? People are always going to believe a third-party endorsement over you talking about and trying to sell, hard sell your product or your story. They generate more engagement than traditional advertising tactics. So people are more interested, people are interacting with this content more frequently. They're highly cost-effective, much more cost-effective than other advertising tactics. And they help you reach a broader audience as well as the appropriate audience. If you've chosen your audience in the right way, like Todd said, it's not necessarily that you're looking for the wine influencers on Instagram. In your case, you might actually want somebody who's a craft beer or craft cider influencer, or you might want somebody from another adjacent category, a cheese influencer or a food influencer, to be helping you tell your story. I wanted to share the story of Michael and Charlie. They're the cheese twins. They have their online personalities. They're 2 young guys who live out in California, and they are official brand ambassadors for Meiomi Wines. And now I recognize this is a very large scale example, but I wanted to sort of show you the ways in which that they work with the business, so that you can sort of think about the ways in which influencers, particularly like bloggers and influencers in the digital and social space, can interact with your brand and serve create marketing utility for your business. So Michael and Charlie are actually cheese experts. They're not wine experts, right? And so Myomi has identified them as experts and important influencers in an adjacent category. So cheese, right? There's cheese is on the upswing, fat is back, people are excited about it, people are talking about it. And what goes better with cheese than wine? So Michael and Charlie, on behalf of the brand, do all sorts of things. They do media appearances. So they go, they travel around the country, and wherever Myomi is going to be at a wine festival or food festival, those two are there, and they're on the news talking about the event. And you can be sure that they always have a bottle of Myomi wine on the table. So in addition, they are serving as the voice of those businesses at various food and wine festivals, cheese festivals. The example in the middle here is them doing a class. And so they're doing cheese pairings, bringing their cheese expertise, and then they're pairing it with Myomi wines. And then below is just some social content, some content creation that they're doing for the brand. So they are sharing on their own social channels, videos and pictures that then the brand is able to repurpose. I'm going to skip that. That's in there for you to look at later. User-generated content. This is just content that people are creating and crafting and telling about, telling your story through their own social channels. This is an opportunity. Make sure that when people take the time to tag you on Instagram or to talk about you on Facebook, that you respond and thank them for visiting or thank them for sharing. It really means a lot. And it's also an opportunity, if you really love the photo that they have shared, you can ask them if you can reshare it. Just remember that you need to ask and then give them credit. This is an example from Skita, which is the women's clothing brand here in Vermont. And then I think that food experiences are really, really important and sought after today. And so I'm sharing two examples of things that are happening in Vermont. Stonecutter Spirits is doing a really awesome event series called The Adventure Dinners. And they are basically one-off, highly crafted food and drink experiences that happen all over the state. They bring in a ton of partner brands and they engage a very small group of people, but you can bet that the people that pay to attend these events are highly engaged and very valuable consumers. So at a recent adventure dinner, some of the brands that they partnered with were Stonecutter Spirits. So Stonecutter Spirits partnered with a chef at a restaurant, a farm for the pigs, a farm who did the flowers and the floral design, Red House Vermont, which does waxed goods, durable goods, Emotep, which does design and build furniture construction, Shacksbury Cider, a potter, a bookmaker, an illustrator that designed the invitations, a maple syrup company, a photographer, a Vermont Creamery, a coffee producer, and surrounded these people with this beautiful experience. And you can bet that when people leave having sort of drank the Stonecutter Kool-Aid, that they feel deeply connected to the brand and the business. Dinner in the Trees is another example, a very similar example that was done by the Intervale Center in Burlington. So I also encourage you to think about brand partnerships as a source of really significant value for your businesses. Again, thinking about adjacent categories. Where else are your consumers? Where else are the valuable consumers shopping? These are examples of people that we've worked with, some in Vermont and some nationally. But you can see there's food in there, but there's also things like Farmhouse Pottery and Simon Pierce, and Commandeer, which is a beautiful retail space in downtown Burlington, or Creminelli Fine Meats. It makes sense when you think about it why a brand like Vermont Creamery would partner with these businesses. But by partnering with them, we surround ourselves with other beautiful brands that can help us highlight various pieces of our story and or the craft nature of our product or our artisan production, and help us reach new and valuable audiences, but in an authentic way. So audiences that would naturally be inclined to have an interest in our brand and our products. I won't talk about this, but these are all the different ways that you can think about success when it comes to these marketing tactics, and then some contact information. So I'll hand it back to you, Helen, if there are any questions from the group.
Great, thank you so much. And let's set it up to and yeah, if you take it off of screen share, woo, now I just got really large on my screen. All right, well, thanks so much for giving that presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to Q&A. I've got some questions of my own. And also I'm going to remind folks that if you are not speaking, if you could mute your microphones, that would be great, just so that we have an okay sound quality. And, but unmute if you want to ask a question, and I'm also going to be watching the chat box. And I'm going to start with a couple of questions, and one of them's a big one, and it's about how you know what your consumer values. I know, FM, you mentioned that it's kind of hard when you're in the middle of it to know what your consumer is valuing, because you obviously do not have an unbiased view of what's interesting about your process, or what you're not a typical wine drinker, for example, or
you're too close to the product. Yeah.
So what do you do to get past that?
So I'll go back to the surveillance idea, the idea of surveillance. So you can look at social media and look at the people that you're following, that are following you. Let's say you have a Instagram account. You can look at who else they're following. You can see what they're talking about on their own social media. You can literally ask them, right? So you could, if you're interacting with them at a farmer's market, or if you're interacting with them in your tasting room or an event, you can ask them in conversation. I think it's helpful to always be, that you should really be focused on having an ongoing conversation with your consumer. Nobody owes you anything as a consumer. Nobody, nobody deserves to have their product purchased, right? Like, you need to earn that as a business and a brand. And so I think that authentically engaging with your consumers in an ongoing way, being in the market and talking to people and listening to people rather than just trying to tell your story is really important. It's a good way to sort of get those data points. Asking your team, if you have a small team, asking them to help you think critically about that is a good way. Doing some research, I often will Google questions that I have about millennials and food consumption behavior and things like that. And there's a lot of information out there. And if you really wanted to get technical about it, you could make a survey. If you were trying to balance between, trying to decide between two investments, like, I don't know, this is totally made up, like solar or canning your wine, those are two financial investments, and you could get at those questions through a survey, and ask those questions in a newsletter or something like that.
Great.
I might add that in terms of the surveillance, is that one of the really powerful things about having an Instagram account or a Twitter account, no matter how much content you're producing, is the ability to do research through those tools and to look at hashtags and see what kind of activity happens around specific concepts, either about wine itself or regionally. And look at how people engage with those kinds of products. They'll actually, put a caption with that photo that tells you exactly what they're thinking at that time. So oftentimes I've found in doing my own research that way that I learned things that I never would have even thought to conceive of. And so that's the important way of getting outside your normal box.
Great. Another question, going from the general to the specific. You mentioned, I think you both mentioned, the idea of investing in professional photography or professional assistance with some of these products. This is something we talk about a lot here in our own organization, and I'm definitely with you on investing in some professional work. But there's also an idea out there that in the age of the internet, everything should be free now, right? Can you speak a little bit more about the importance of adding some professional assistance in with what I can snap on my own cell phone, which, by the way, is lousy. I'm a terrible photographer. It's obvious, but for others.
Okay, I have a couple of thoughts on this. Yes, maybe you have a really, it's not to say that you can't do it yourself if you're very good at it and if you take the time to do it in the right way. But the notion that everything should be free or super low cost, when we first started working with food bloggers, we refused to pay them. And it took a lot of time for us to change that culture within our organization. And the way that I was able to sell that, and the way that I'll sell this to you, is that in the same way that you take a lot of time to make your product, to craft the perfect bottle of wine, or that we take to craft the perfect piece of cheese. These people are professionals, and this is their craft. This is how they make a living. So you might not value it or take it seriously, but they certainly do. And the other thing is that it doesn't have to be expensive. There are lots of ways to execute really, really high quality photography and video for relatively low sums. So it doesn't have to be a huge investment that will break the bank.
Yeah, and I would just say, that I agree that definitely any of your production materials, brochures, things like that should definitely, have professional quality imagery. It is a skill. Taking photos is a skill that can be developed, and it's a skill that you might want to consider asking about when you're hiring people to work for your business. Because I know that I've seen some people be extremely successful with handheld photography, and that's actually a huge drawing factor to their brand and their story. So, but the thing is, they may not be paying for it, but it's professional quality. It's professional in its approach to what the imagery is meaning to convey.
Right.
And I just on that note, going back to something that FM said about packaging. This is a discussion I started having with folks last year, that with wine, especially because wine labels are so important, and they are probably the most important way that people recognize your product, is that think about label design as something that's yes, visually appealing, but it should be photographable in terms of, so that someone on the street or a consumer can take that photo and get a picture of it. And I know this is somebody that takes a lot of wine label photos with food in the background, or in trying to be in context, that some of the labels that are really tall and thin, I don't know how much they cost to produce them, because I know that they're kind of non-standard, but they also make it very difficult to get a picture of the label that is clear enough so that it can be recognizable by somebody else down the road. So thinking about label structure for easy photo acquisition, maybe something to think about, because again, the sharing that you get from person to person, word of mouth is still the best, way of transferring new customers into your locus. But when people have the power to share word of mouth, instead of 1-to-1, but 1 to thousands, being able to do that clearly is really important.
Yeah, I'll add to that when you think about how often you personally or somebody, a member of your business, is at the point of purchase as the consumer is making that decision to pick up your bottle of wine and take it and pay for it and take it home, how often are you there? Is it 5% of the time? That would be amazing if it was 5% of the time. You want it to be a lot less, but your packaging often is the first and potentially only brand encounter that a consumer will have with your product. And so making sure that that packaging does justice to the time that you've invested and the craft and your practice is as important, in my opinion, as what's in the bottle.
Can I ask a question?
No.
And this would be for the Alberts, because they're on. FM brought up the capsize wine in the can, that Shelburne's got. I just happened to catch that there was a mention of that in a Burlington Free Press article, and the article was, I think, from yesterday. And the title of the article was "Vermont Drinks Worthy of a Spot in Your Ski Bag." Because it's not glass, it's easily recyclable, lightweight, and I was wondering if that was something that they were involved in courting that article, or if that was organically generated. And
I think it was organic, and interestingly, I read that article and was really disappointed that there were no mentions of wine, and I didn't see us in it.
Oh yeah, it was down kind of below the fold.
I'm gonna go look for it.
Yeah, it was 19 hours ago, and yeah, yours was the last in the list.
Okay.
It was let me just do this quick. It was Stowe Ciders Tips Up, and then a True Ginger Beer from Halyard, and then Gronfell Meadery's Valkyrie's Choice Mead, and then Shelburne's Capsize in a can.
Somehow that's cool. It's organic. Obviously, we missed it completely.
Okay, well, but now this is something that you can turn around and share. But it's
Surveillance is the fourth S. Surveillance.
Surveillance. Okay, we missed. Surveillance was the fourth S.
I say actually it might be the third.
The third. I've got notes.
I looked at that because I get very disappointed that all the articles are about beer and cider and distilleries, and they never talk about wine. And I missed it.
There you go.
There you go.
Just think
Anyway,
about those
thanks for
flask
pointing it out.
makers out there who are disappointed in that article.
The what, Helen?
The flask makers. Where were they in that article?
Yeah.
Anything, including wine. Are there? That's actually an interesting point in terms of connecting with recreation and outdoor recreation. I know that's a big thing for many Vermont brands. Are there a lot of wineries who are doing that? It seems so ironic to have wine and other alcoholic beverages connected with outdoor recreation, and yet, in my experience, that is a very close connection.
Well, last winter we did have the ski rack. We partnered with the ski rack. They came down to our place. They did a demo on a Saturday. We could have had better snow though. So yeah, we are conscious of that to some extent.
Great. I'm going to pause to let other people ask a question before I just go through my list of questions. We've got 10 minutes left, and I don't want to take up all the question asking. But while people think of theirs, I have ongoing questions. And this is another kind of technical one, but you mentioned the idea of we want to pass on information that other folks are writing about us and use their images and thoughts and words towards our own promotion and sharing with our audiences. How do we keep track of what the rules are around that in social media? This came up in another conversation that I was part of recently. What is the protocol around how do you ask, when do you need to ask, how do you properly cite? Is there any one source to know what that protocol is? And if not, how do we stay abreast of those rules as the different platforms emerge?
Okay, a couple of thoughts. One is that Google is always really helpful. But as a general practice, I always lean on the side of over attributing. So I feel like it's not worth getting in a situation where somebody's mad at you or causing a fuss or pursuing legal action for whatever reason. So it's, with the stuff on social media, consumers are always, I'd say like 95% of the time, really happy for you to engage with them about it, and then are going to say absolutely. And I'll usually say, the caption will always specifically call out who that person is or tag them on the photo. I think in general, it's just always safe. It's always good to ask. When it comes to the professional stuff though, like if you were to work with a blogger or a photographer, that's the kind of thing where you need to make sure that in advance you're negotiating how you want to use that photography. So not only is this for social media, but I'm also going to repurpose this in my recipe book or in my brochure for my winery. So I think that the pace at which these things are happening, that platforms are emerging and changing and shifting, that Google is always going to be a good reference, a reference point. But in general, I think what will never change is that you should, if you didn't make it, you need to sort of attribute where it came from.
Yeah, I would follow up and agree that attribution is the key, and the platforms in a way are built to help with that. On Instagram, there's a Regram app that basically allows you to push something forward, but it implicitly details where that's coming from. And the other thing you can do about Instagram is if it is public information, if it's not somebody's not posting only privately, if it's public, then that Instagram URL, the link, is embeddable. And so I've seen pretty good use of that in blog pieces and other online articles, so that it's clear, whose information it is, but you can use it as a photo, essentially in line with a blog, but it's their Instagram post along with their caption, and that can be actually fairly powerful in terms of conveying that it's not just me that's saying this, here's someone else that's validating a position that we're taking or some information that we're sharing, and it's already there for the world to see. The same way now we see people's tweets from the news basically embedded in news streams.
Great. I'm going to just, because we've got time for one more question, and I can ask it, or someone else who's on the webinar can ask it. All right. So my question is, there's a lot of stuff we can do ourselves for marketing and getting our winery story out there. How do we know when it's time to turn to the professionals and hire, even if it's just on a quick contract basis, someone to do this for us? Is there any clear litmus test of when we reach the point that perhaps we should be looking to someone who has their expertise here?
A couple thoughts, I guess. If it hurts, like if it's really painful, and it's keeping you from doing valuable things in other parts of your business, it might be an indication that, and there's no shame in that, right? You can't be all things. Like I'm not a cheesemaker, right? I think also, I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of people unfortunately don't realize that it is time. But marketing is, in my experience, is really at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to making, a business, allocating funds and making an investment, right? Especially in feels like in the artisan world. I'm the last one to get allocated funds, and I'm the first one to have them taken away if something's not going right in our business. And that, in some part, is just the way the world works for marketers. And so I understand that, especially for small producers, that is a really significant challenge. A couple of thoughts on how to do. So outside expertise can really help you structure your thinking, right? So you can find a seasoned professional that can come into your business as more of a strategic consultant and in a one-off way, help you just sort of create order out of the chaos. There's all of these channels, there's all of these opportunities. The tactics can be complicated. They do not all deliver equal value to your business. And so there could be potentially value for you to bring in a consultant to help you create a roadmap. And that roadmap could be your roadmap for 3 years. And you just then are executing tactically against that. You don't have to, you don't have to do the painful part of the marketing strategy. They can help you be a third, sort of a third party outside perspective and give you license to not have an Instagram account, or to tell you to stop doing that thing, or stop fretting about not doing that thing. The other thing is that there's lots of really talented young folk in the state who might be college students or interested in doing an internship with you for, a starting, an hourly wage. I won't say no pay, but there are lots of opportunities to engage with really energetic and talented young folk in the state. And those relationships are valuable. They're efficient, cost efficient for you. These people are often native to the platforms. They use them in their personal life, but also they're valuable conduits for helping the industry to recruit and retain young folk. A good way for Vermont to keep young people engaged in the economy and in the state. And we've been really excited when we've had the opportunity to host UVM interns that come for course credit or come for a super affordable hourly rate, and they are really skilled and do really good work. So there are ways to efficiently get at outside help as well.
Great. Todd, other thoughts on that?
I would say that's dead on, and I can't really add much more on that note.
Excellent. Well, it is almost 10 o'clock, which is our stopping hour. I could keep asking questions forever, but I won't. I did just share with everyone my email address in case you don't have it. If you think of questions that you didn't think of or that you wanted to ask but were on mute or whatever, just send them to me and I will track down answers. And then post notes and links and a link to the recording on that vermontfresh.net website, and also send out an email. You also just got vermontfresh.net to remind you of what our website is. And thank you to both of our presenters for working on these presentations and taking time this morning to speak with us. This was great and a ton of information. We'll be back in 2018 with some more webinars and a few in-person workshops. It's an exciting project to be working on, and it's great to be involved in tasting and promoting Vermont wine. What a treat. So thank you all, and I'll stop the recording now.
Cheers.
Al, can I add, Helen, that this doesn't need to be recorded, but feel free to reach out to me. My contact information will be in whatever Helen shares, and I'm always happy to sit down over a glass of Vermont wine and have a conversation with you about what you're struggling with or what you're excited about or what you're interested in. This is the kind of stuff that I live and breathe for. So thank you for joining us today.
I hear those glasses of Vermont wine pair really well with Vermont cheese.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Todd. And FM. And people are signing off. And everyone who's joined us. All right. Recording is stopped.